He stood alone at this edge of the training field, weathered boots, a beat-up truck behind him, and a silence that spoke louder than any drill. No uniform, no medals, just a rolled sleeve and a glimpse of a tattoo, a trident, faded and real. Most thought he was nobody, until one recruit looked closer and realized they were standing in the presence of a legend. Welcome to True Kind Stories. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And if you believe stories like his deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us share them. Every Thursday, before sunrise kissed the Nevada sand, a dusty blue Chevy rolled into the dirt lot beyond the wire fence. The man who climbed out moved with the deliberate pace of someone who'd lived through too many hard years, a slight limp in his left leg, a worn flannel wrapped tight around a wiry frame. His name was Caleb Walker, though no one at the training grounds ever said it out loud. Caleb wasn't on the roster. He wasn't an instructor, and he sure wasn't there to visit anyone. He'd show up before Reveille, long before the cadence calls shattered the desert quiet, and he'd take up his spot leaning against the same rusted fence post at the edge of Camp Raven Rock. Arms folded, gaze sharp. To the younger recruits, he was background noise, a quiet relic, maybe a bored retiree with nowhere better to be. But the instructors never asked him to leave. They didn't have to, because in places like this, respect isn't requested, it's earned. And Caleb Walker, despite his silence and lack of uniform, radiated the kind of weight that made even seasoned drill sergeants pause. Whatever he was, he had seen more than most, and it showed. At first, Logan Myers, barely 19 and fresh out of high school in rural Iowa, thought Caleb was just another eccentric drifter watching the world pass by. But something about the old man started to gnaw at him. During week 4 of training, Logan began to notice the way Caleb's eyes followed their every move sharp, unblinking, as if cataloging mistakes before they even happened. It was during a blistering hot Thursday afternoon when the shift happened. Recruits were crawling through gravel under barbed wire, faces smeared with sweat and dust, lungs burning. Logan's rifle slipped for a second, a minor fumble that went unnoticed by his instructor, but not by Caleb. His eyes narrowed, his jaw locked. He didn't speak, he didn't move, but Logan felt it, the silent correction, the unspoken standard. Later that evening, as shadows stretched across Camp Raven Rock and most recruits passed out from exhaustion, Logan found himself lingering by the chain-link fence. Caleb hadn't left yet. He was sipping coffee from a dented thermos, staring out at the empty field with the same stillness he carried every week. Logan didn't speak. He just stood nearby, unsure why he felt drawn to this quiet figure. Caleb didn't acknowledge him, but his presence was louder than words. Logan had seen fake war stories online, men parading in patches they hadn't earned. Caleb didn't need any of that. No rank, no medals, just a faded navy cap and a quiet stare. Then it happened. A gust of wind pulled back Caleb's rolled sleeve just enough to reveal the corner of a tattoo, aged and half buried in leathery skin. Logan squinted. It wasn't decorative. It was precise. Military. A SEAL trident. But not like the ones in movies. This was the older version, smaller, stripped of flair, earned before slogans and spotlight. Logan didn't say a word, but something in his gut shifted. This man wasn't just watching. He was measuring them, testing if they were worthy. He returned to the barracks that night with a different kind of ache, not from muscle fatigue, but from the weight of what he'd seen. Caleb Walker wasn't a ghost. He was a standard, one that demanded more than physical strength. He demanded presence, purpose, and quiet excellence. And Logan knew, deep down, that nothing in camp would feel the same again. The following Thursday arrived with a heavy stillness in the air. The sun hadn't yet crested over the Sierra Range, but the compound was already humming with pre-dawn tension. Logan Myers laced his boots tighter than usual, jaw set, mind replaying the image of that old, faded trident inked into Caleb Walker's forearm. The instructors barked orders. Drills intensified. The pace was brutal push-ups until arms failed. Log carries through coarse sand, full gear sprints across cracked earth. But Logan wasn't just running drills anymore. He was watching for him. And like clockwork, Caleb appeared. Same boots, same faded cap, same limp that seemed less like weakness and more like a reminder of something survived. But something was different. As the team powered through rope ascents, one of the senior instructors, Chief Petty Officer Jensen, paused mid-stride, his eyes locked on Caleb across the fence. For a second, everything stopped, not the drills, not the yelling, but something internal. Jensen didn't salute, didn't speak, he just stared, as if he were recognizing a ghost. Later that afternoon, it happened again. 2 instructors, both combat-hardened, wandered near the perimeter under the guise of equipment checks. But their eyes weren't on gear, they were on Caleb. No one said a word. No need. Something was moving beneath the surface, unspoken, heavy. Logan watched it unfold in real time. A man who had said nothing, asked for nothing, now commanded silence just by standing still. As training ended and recruits peeled off toward showers and chow lines, Logan lingered behind once more. He edged toward Caleb's usual spot. This time, he wasn't alone. Several instructors stood a few feet from the fence, not in casual observation, but at attention. One by one. They lined up, facing him. No commands were issued, no protocol followed, just quiet respect, aligned in posture. Logan stood frozen, heart pounding. This wasn't ceremony. This was something deeper. Reverence, recognition. Finally, one voice broke the silence. Chief Jensen, voice steady but humble, called out, "Sir, would you speak to the recruits next week?" Caleb didn't flinch. He placed one foot into his truck, paused just briefly, and replied without looking back. Nothing to say. Then he drove off. No fanfare. No goodbye. Just the rumble of old tires and the trail of dust curling behind him. But what he left behind that day wasn't just an impression. It was a shift. After that Thursday, the tone across Camp Raven Rock subtly changed. It wasn't something you could clock or document. But it was there in the way boots struck the ground with a little more purpose, in how recruits checked each other's form more often, in how silence became less awkward and more sacred. For Logan Myers, the shift was internal and irreversible. He'd trained harder before, pushed himself past limits, but now every crawl through gravel, every pull-up, every sprint across the blistering tarmac carried more than just the weight of expectation, it carried legacy. Not one outlined in briefings or handbooks, but embodied by a man who hadn't said a single word. Logan started waking up before reveille, watching the sun rise from the edge of Lane 4. He wasn't the only one. Others from his unit began to glance toward the rusted fence post as they lined up for drills, a silent check-in. A confirmation. And every Thursday, when Caleb Walker returned, they stood straighter, shouted louder, worked harder. The instructors did not mention it, neither did the command, but nobody asked the old man to leave. His presence had become permission. Permission to aim higher. To remember this wasn't about vanity or valor, it was about carrying something forward. One evening, Logan sat alone in the rec room, flipping through old unit logs and restricted access records he probably shouldn't have been able to open. He wasn't looking for gossip, he needed context. A name, a story, anything. He found it in a single line on a declassified memo from 2004. C. Walker, consultant, retired SO1. Clearance granted for silent observation. No engagement, no expiration. That was it. No photo, no missions, no commendations. But to Logan, it said more than enough. Silent observation, as if Caleb was still on watch. Still evaluating the next generation. From that moment, Logan's mindset shifted. He didn't just want to graduate. He wanted to be worthy of that gaze, of that silence, to carry it, like Caleb had, without asking for credit or applause. He spoke quietly to two of his closest squad mates that night. After lights out, "We should mark that spot," he said. They didn't ask why. They knew. 3 nights later, under a curtain of stars and absolute quiet, Logan and 2 fellow recruits, Ethan Cole and Mason Hill, returned to Lane 4 with a small object wrapped in cloth. They didn't wear their uniforms. This wasn't protocol. It was something more personal, something sacred. They had taken a scrap piece of brass from the machine shop, cut it clean, polished it by hand, and etched 6 simple words into its surface, reserved until he says otherwise. No rank, no name, no unit. Just that. They bolted it to the inside of the fence post, where Caleb Walker always stood, just above eye level. It gleamed under the moonlight. Small but undeniable, a quiet acknowledgement to a man who had never asked to be seen, but had changed them all by being there. The following Thursday, Caleb returned as punctual as sunrise. Same boots, same limp, same coffee thermos tucked beneath his arm. He walked past the trucks, past the yard, and paused ever so slightly as his eyes landed on the plaque. He didn't touch it, didn't react outwardly. But Logan saw it a brief moment in Caleb's eyes, like recognition meeting memory. Then, as always, he turned toward the course, leaned against the post, and resumed his silent vigil. Only now, something was different. The recruits who passed him along the fence straightened their backs instinctively. Some didn't even know why. They hadn't seen the tattoo, they hadn't read the memo, but they felt it. That presence, that standard. Instructors no longer glanced. They acknowledged. One even adjusted his gait as he marched past, shoulders squared, as if the man behind the fence was still issuing silent commands from an era long buried beneath redacted reports and forgotten wars. Weeks passed, and the story of the plaque remained inside the unit. No one asked who put it there. No one dared to remove it. It belonged. And Logan? He began to understand something crucial. Legacy wasn't about ceremony. It wasn't a medal or a speech or a story written in a book. It was this, a plaque no bigger than a hand, placed under cover of night, honoring a man who gave everything and asked for nothing. A man who showed up and watched and never said a word. By the final phase of training, Logan Myers had changed. Not in the way most recruits did. The physical transformation was expected. He was leaner, faster, more capable. But what had shifted ran deeper. Somewhere inside the way he moved, the way he listened, the way he carried himself even when no one was watching. Caleb Walker still showed up every Thursday, still leaned against that post, still wore the same flannel and cap, still said nothing. But now when he arrived, the air across Camp Raven Rock tightened with an invisible gravity. Recruits straightened without being told. Instructors lowered their voices. And Logan, along with a growing number of his peers, began to treat every drill, every formation, like it mattered not just for themselves, but for the legacy standing behind that rusted fence. Logan started staying behind after training ended. He'd walk the perimeter, inspecting ropes, checking gear lines, sweeping through the course as if trying to see it the way Caleb did with clarity. precision. Wait. It wasn't hero worship. It was responsibility. He felt it most when the old man didn't come. One Thursday passed, then another. Lane 4 was empty. Caleb had never said goodbye, never explained why he came or why he might stop. But the absence hit hard, and it was felt compound-wide. Some of the instructors said nothing. Others simply paused for longer than usual before beginning drills. But Logan couldn't shake the feeling. So one night, he walked back to the fence after hours. Alone? The stars were faint, the wind still. He stood where Caleb used to stand, arms folded, eyes fixed on the training field. It was quiet, peaceful, but not empty. He turned to leave and noticed a slip of paper taped behind the brass plaque. A folded envelope, his name handwritten across the front, Myers. Inside, a single coin. Old, heavy. One side worn with a sealed trident, the other blank except for a single line. Carefully etched by hand. Still watching. He never asked who left it. He didn't need to, because by then, Logan understood what Caleb Walker had given them all. Not a story, not a lesson, but an expectation to carry what mattered, without saying a word, and to always leave something behind that speaks louder than your name. Weeks passed, and still, Caleb Walker didn't return. But the spot where he used to stand remained untouched. The plaque stayed, unpolished but respected, like a quiet oath nailed into steel. Nobody asked what happened to him. Nobody needed to, because the man had already given everything he came to give, and the silence he left behind was louder than any speech. Logan Myers, now in the final stretch of training, found himself walking the field differently, not with arrogance or aimlessness, but with intent. He wasn't just chasing a badge or a graduation date anymore. He was chasing a standard one he'd seen live and breathe behind a chain-link fence. Some nights, he'd stand there alone, near Lane 4, just long enough to let the desert wind carry his thoughts. He wouldn't say anything. He didn't need to, because that's how Caleb taught them, not through lectures or war stories, but through presence. One morning, as the unit assembled, Logan noticed something. Every recruit who passed the fence line straightened their back just a little more. Even those who never saw Caleb up close or caught the glimpse of ink on his forearm, they felt it. The shift, the reverence, the responsibility. Then came a quiet moment during gear inspection, when an instructor with salt and pepper stubble and deep scars across both hands placed a hand on Logan's shoulder. He didn't say much, just leaned in and whispered, "He saw something in you." Logan didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat tightened, chest full. That one line meant more than any formal recognition, because it wasn't about being special. It was about being worthy. And Logan made a vow that day not to seek glory or fame, but to become the kind of man who didn't need to speak in order to be heard. On graduation day, as the sun rose over Camp Raven Rock and the unit stood shoulder to shoulder, Logan's eyes drifted toward Lane 4 one last time. Caleb wasn't there, but the space he left behind, that stillness, that shadow felt full, as if his presence hadn't vanished, only stepped back, waiting for the next to rise and carry it forward. And Logan, he stepped into that silence with his head high, not to replace Caleb Walker, but to honor him. Not with words, but with the way he moved through the world. There are people in life who don't need a spotlight to make an impact. They don't speak loudly. They don't ask to be seen, but their presence, steady, quiet, unwavering, changes everything. Caleb Walker was that kind of man. He reminded us that leadership doesn't always wear stripes. Sometimes, it leans quietly against a fence, watches from a distance, and holds everyone to a higher standard without saying a word. The most powerful lessons aren't barked from a podium. They're lived in how we show up, how we carry ourselves, and how we honor what came before us. And the truth is, the loudest voice in the room is often the one that doesn't speak at all. If this story moved you, drop a like and hit that subscribe button. We share powerful stories that deserve to be heard. Help us keep them alive.